politicians and different bureaucrats at the time. So it's my, more opinion that this was kind of more forced on, not by organic measures, by, organic panic is what I like to call it, which is just be, parents overreacting and being overzealous. I think it was way more orchestrated by the actual other companies at the time that saw a lot of their profits being cut into because of other companies like EC Comics. Like I said, because they had actual influence over politicians and senators at the time. But because of this, you basically have cut out an entire genre of comic books. So, thankfully, right at the time that the Comics Code Authority is cracking down on all of this, there's one little workaround and one sidestep that they kind of overlooked. And thankfully, Harvey Kurtzman and Will Gaines from EC Comics kind of caught on to this, and they established Mad Magazine. And that's the workaround for that was the Comics Code Authority only applied to comic book format books. Mad Magazine was magazine format, so it did not fall under the code of the Comics Code Authority. It didn't fall under the bureaucrats of that. So, thankfully, because of Mad Magazine, we were able to then have other creators come in, if I can get my shades changed, to kind of, thankfully, sidestep the whole Comics Code Authority. So, as long as it's done in parody, as another kind of sidestep that the Comics Code Authority overlooked was, you could get away with a lot more. But really, what it mainly came down to was just the magazine format alone. It was just one kind of dumb little oversight that they didn't catch on to.
How mainstream was Mad Magazine at the
And
time?
actually, it was fairly, because thankfully it was a product of William Gaines as well, who was already established in EC Comics. It was a publisher of EC Comics, and that was the first publisher of Mad Magazine, which is something I didn't know at the time until doing my research. So it already, thankfully, because of its popularity with the other comics, it immediately got a following pretty much right away. And within Mad Comics, or Mad Magazine, you had one particular creative writer and artist, and that was Wally Wood, who had an epic tenure at EC Comics. He was one of the most forerunning artists at the time at EC Comics, especially with his horror work from Tales of the Crypt and Tales of Horror. And he really pushed a lot of boundaries within Mad Magazine, more so than anybody else. Everybody else in Mad Magazine kind of just stuck to parody and keeping things kind of silly and whatnot. Whereas Wally Wood would kind of, every once in a while deviate and kind of test the boundaries of what he could get away with within Mad Magazine. And not only that, he would be the one to lay the groundwork what would eventually become Underground Comics. And we'll get to him in just a little bit later. Things don't go so well with Mad Magazine with Harvey Kurtzman, though. Kurtzman wants a lot more control. He wants more creative control, and he wants to be co-ownership of Mad Magazine. And William Gaines is not willing to give that up. So Kurtzman decides to walk away from Mad Magazine and create his own. And that would be Help Magazine, started in 1960. And with Help Magazine, again, he is unable, though, to pull a lot of the artists and writers that were at Mad Magazine that he had already had established ties with. So he basically has to, but because they're all under contract with Mad Magazine, they can't do work outside of that, especially with Kurtzman, because there's such bad blood now between the creators of Mad and him now because of him leaving. And then him now starting his own, well, they don't really want to help him at all, so they're not going to allow him to use the artists and writers that he already had contacts with. So he has to kind of just pull together a bunch of unknowns to get this going. So he basically hires, like I said, a complete ragtag band of unestablished writers. Because another thing is he's funding this entirely on his own. He doesn't have the money to pay, people that are already in the business And they would take an artist and just send them somewhere within the United States or somewhere in the world and do basically like a little editorial piece on whatever city they send this artist to. And Robert Crumb really got a lot of attention for his work that was called Harlem. They sent him basically a 2-week stint in Harlem to just basically document what he saw and experienced in Harlem. And basically, Harvey Kurtzman came up with this idea to send just random various artists to these different places. Istanbul even was one of them, that people would just go and basically kind of document their time, like, to kind of give a broader perspective, but also in a way that wasn't normally presented at the time. It was a very new concept.